Hello, everyone. My name is Amie, and today we're going to be talking about my top 10 favorite romance books of all time. Just to give a little bit of context, I absolutely love love when it's healthy and when it's functional. And I find myself gravitating towards romance. I always have, I think, even from like the very start of my reading life. I feel like everybody loves love and everybody craves love in different ways. And for me it's no different. So I think the fact that I love romance is not a shock to me because it's enjoyable. You know that there's going to be like a guaranteed happy ending. And I think romance books, despite the fact that at times people want to paint it as frivolous and unserious, I think it teaches us a lot. I think reading romance books is a great way to learn about yourself, especially for somebody who grew up not seeing a lot of romance around me. Reading different books has really honed in what I like and my own wants. Because, in my opinion, a good romance book is aspirational. If you find yourself loving a romance book to the point where you've declared it a favorite, there has to be some part of it that you would want for yourself. I'm assuming, I don't want to generalize, but reading romance books has made me know more about myself, my likes and dislikes, the kind of things that I'm willing to put up with or not put up with in real life. Okay, and so with that, let's get into the video. So, up first, we have Book Lovers by Emily Henry. And if you're in this book space, I find it hard to believe that you would not have heard of Book Lovers. It's a story of Nora, who is a book agent, and Charlie, who is an editor. And then they have like a little bit of a meetup at the beginning of the book. They don't particularly like each other at first, and then they run into each other in Charlie's hometown, where Nora has taken her little sister Libby to have a little bit of a staycation because she's worried about her sister and she wants to get to the bottom of why her sister hasn't been acting like herself. So they take this holiday together to really just talk it out so that she can find out what's wrong with her sister and then they can bond. And because this is Charlie's hometown, she sees him a lot and they spend a lot of time together. And I really like this book for several reasons. Nora and Charlie are so well suited to each other and they have this incredible chemistry. That was right off the bat, the banter, incredible. Like Emily Henry is a banter queen. If you're not going to like her for anything, you will like her for the conversations between her characters because Nora and Charlie are so witty and they bounce off each other so well. They could literally be a comedic duo, I think. Maybe that's not everyone's, opinion. But I love their mutual love of books. Also, nobody can convince me that not both Nora and Charlie are not Virgos. They are Virgos to the max. I related to Nora so much in terms of being extremely ambitious and being unapologetic about wanting to have a successful career and also not particularly feeling maternal because I know that that is something that, like, not being a maternal person or somebody who particularly aspires to motherhood is almost like a political act. Not wanting to be a parent or having hesitations about being a parent is, I think, quite political. It's something that's seen as quite contrarian, even though it shouldn't be. It should just be accepted that some people want to be parents and some people don't. And either scenario shouldn't be a problem. But that's not the reality. And I think it was lovely to see. I think it was lovely to see a character who I could relate to on so many levels. I felt like the only thing Nora and I didn't have in common was race. She was me to a T. I have never related to a female character more. Like her ambition and the fact that she doesn't particularly want to be a parent, the fact that she will do anything for her sister, the fact that she loves clothes and she loves to look good and she is unapologetically just herself and unwilling to compromise who she is because the person that she is not a bad person. And I feel like oftentimes women shrink themselves and they kind of want to make themselves smaller. And the things that they often want to repress about themselves are not inherently bad things, they're just different from the norm. And for me, I love that Nora was very comfortable. She was very quick to sort of end the relationship because it didn't align with her values. She wasn't willing to compromise the parts of herself that really you shouldn't compromise when you're entering into a relationship. And obviously, because she craved partnership, she craved love. But I love the fact that she stood on business. She knew exactly who she was and she was unwilling to compromise the fundamental aspects of herself. And I love that about her. I found that Charlie was very, very similar to Nora. They were both ambitious people. They loved books. They didn't particularly feel any sort of parental calling between both of them. And, Charlie had his own issues, but Charlie felt steady. Like just everything about Charlie appealed to me. And that's probably why he's one of my favorite male characters that has been in any romance. I just love the fact that he was like Nora. He was unwilling to compromise who he was and his own values for a relationship. And the thing I loved most about Nora and Charlie is that they felt like two whole people coming together. You know, it didn't feel like Nora had to save Charlie or Charlie had to save Nora, or they felt like two sturdy people. And I kind of liked the fact that they were older. I think they were both in their 30s in the book. And I think it made for a very mature couple dynamic, which I really appreciated, because I find that even though they are adult romances, sometimes they read like they're teenage romances, especially when the characters don't seem very mature. And I've always kind of considered myself quite a mature person. I related to Nora and Charlie because they felt that way. They felt like not that they had their lives together, but they felt like they were actively working to do so. Also, I know that the sister aspect of this, some people like it, some people don't like it. I loved it because as somebody who would do anything for their sisters, as somebody who would die for their sisters, I loved the addition of Libby in the book, because I feel like at times when any one of my sisters have been going through a rough time or have been having a hard time in life, it's halted my life. When my sisters are sad, I almost cannot function. I can't, almost like I can't be happy if my sisters are not happy, because we're very close. And I am somebody who, not that my feelings are dictated by other people, but I feel for people. And the closer you are to me, the more I tend to take on your burden. If one of my sisters were sad, it would affect the quality of my life, because I would be constantly worrying for them, constantly wondering if they were okay, you know, trying to help them in any way that I could. And so I loved the additional storyline of Libby because it mirrored me and my own personality and what I would do for my sisters, which is pretty much, I would do almost anything for them. I understand how people could find that irritating, but for me, I absolutely loved the addition. And I like characters to feel like whole people. And a big part of that is them having a life outside their relationship dynamic. And for Nora, it was her sister, but that could be in terms of friends and a job. I just like them to feel like they have something else apart from the romance. And that is what the addition of Libby, the addition made her just a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more whole. And it made me connect with who she was. I don't want to spoil the book, but the addition of her sister and when they discussed, you know, the way they were raised really made Nora realize some things about herself that she hadn't previously, because she had this image of her mother that was perfect. And there was a conversation that she had with Libby that made her realize that she shouldn't hold her mother to the standards that she had been holding her. But the only way that she was able to learn that was from Libby's experience of their mother. So I loved it because it made Nora feel like a whole complicated human being, and I absolutely love that in a book. Charlie, I found, was really funny. He had his own insecurities, but like Nora, he was very sure of himself. He had a good idea of who he was, of what he wanted to achieve, of what he loved. And I feel like him and Nora really complemented each other. You know, they were there for each other to fill in those gaps that each person didn't have, and you know, helped each other with their insecurities and their worries and their fears. Even with his own issues, he still felt quite like a steady, unmovable, unshakable person. It's not because of the absence of problems, because he does have his own problems. It just kind of felt like he's just extremely dependable. That's what I would use to describe Charlie. He's extremely dependable. He's aware of who he is. He is sure of who he is. When I think of Charlie, I think steady, I think dependable, I think funny, I think stylish. That's something I've grown to love in a book. I love when especially a male character likes clothes, and it was hinted a bit, like not even hinted, but like Charlie enjoys clothes. Like he talked about having like a capsule wardrobe, and that's something I've really been enjoying with like male characters. People, the ones who like fashion and they like clothes and they talk about like neatness. I like when people are just unapologetically neat and tidy. And that's just kind of how I am. So I like when it's reflected in a book. That's why I say Charlie and Nora are definitely Virgos, both of them. And he speaks to everything I like about people. He's extremely clean. He has a capsule wardrobe. He's tidy. He likes lists. They like to organize. One of the things that I loved between them is their mutual love of contracts. Like, I loved everything about their dynamic. I always think to myself, if I were ever going to consider dating somebody, it would probably be someone like Charlie. He's just so great. He's definitely up there. He's just incredible. I liked everything about him, truly. Also, one of my favorite things about this book is the child free discussion, because I feel like a lot of straight romances, if they do have an epilogue, somebody will be pregnant at the end of it. Or I've even read a series recently where like there's seven siblings and I think everybody has children at the end, and it's just a bit same. So I love the fact that they were staunchly child free. They were like, we are not having children, and it was something that was discussed before they'd even like progress fully into relationship. And I love that, because it's nice to see different kind of couples have different kind of endings. Not everybody wants to have children, not everybody can have children, and so it's nice to see that discussion in a book where they're like, we're not going to have children, but we have these nieces that we love, and they both love kids, but they're like, ultimately they did decide that having children was not for them. And I quite loved the addition of that in this book. So book lovers, it's my favorite Emily Henry book, so just in case you're wondering. So far I've read Beach Read, I've read People We Meet on Vacation, I've read Happy Place, and I've read Book Lovers. I would love to read the rest, and I probably will and make a video about ranking my favorites. But in terms of Emily Henry books, that is definitely one of my favorites. And in terms of romance as a whole, it's definitely it's up there for me. I've read it multiple times. I have various quotes that I go back to every now and again, and I'm just absolutely obsessed. Charlie and Nora are top tier characters for me in any romance. I loved them individually and I absolutely adore them together. And I'm so glad that I read Book Lovers, because it truly changed the way that I viewed love and compromise and choice. It hit me in a way that not many books do, and that's why I absolutely loved it. I think everybody should read it. Up next, we have Take a Hint, Dani Brown by Talia Hibbert, and I am obsessed. First of all, I have read this book so many times, and it never ceases to amaze me the fact that every time I read it, I discover something new. And I love a book like that, where you read it multiple times and you pick up certain behavioral traits and little tidbits and bits and bobs that you may not typically have caught the first or the second time or the third time around when you read it. And this book focuses on Dani and Zaf. Zaf is a security guard at the university, and Dani is currently working on her, I think, PhD. And she teaches at the university that Zaf works at. So they see each other on a daily basis and they're friendly. So every morning when Dani comes in, she brings Zaf a coffee, and then he usually has a granola bar or some kind of like cereal bar that he gives to her because she always forgets to eat. So they have that kind of friendly rapport from the beginning of the book. It doesn't seem like they're particularly close, but they see each other every day, and so they're kind of like loosely friendly in a way. They're not close friends. So Dani is extremely professionally driven. She wants to make a name for herself. She's earning a PhD, and and what I loved about the book is people always talk about friends to lovers, but that, I think, that is a book that just cements friends to lovers as probably the ultimate trope for me. So it's a fake dating romance in the sense that Dani gets stuck in an elevator and Zaf saves her, and then he dramatically carries her out and somebody takes a picture and posts it on social media and it goes viral. And so they figure that they could use their viral moment to really put the spotlight on Zaf's charity, which he's formed to help boys and men with their emotions, like how to talk about their emotions and how to manage their emotions in healthy ways, because Zaf has lost his father and his brother. And the way that he finds out about their deaths is so traumatic and just disgusting. And so basically he's come out of a fog. Zaf has anxiety as well, and so what he did was he went to therapy, and he wanted to form a foundation where he can help boys who have experienced the same thing that he has or worse, or different, people in different emotional circumstances. And so the charity hasn't really taken off because it hasn't gotten the publicity that it needs. And so they decide to use this viral moment of him carrying her out of the elevator to really elevate the charity and push the charity. So they start fake dating because everybody now is interested in their romance, everybody in school. And I really loved this book so much. Dani and Zaf were truly like couple goals. First of all, I loved seeing a woman in academia. There's just something about woman academia that's just extremely appealing. And so I love the fact that she was a plus size black romantic lead, and she was just honestly incredible. I related to her, especially her reluctance to dating people and love, because you have never read about a character that is completely opposed to love. Like she just wants, she's been hurt in the past and she wants nothing to do with a relationship. And she's also bisexual as well. So I love the rep of the book. The fact that she was plus size wasn't a plot device in any way. It was just who she was. It wasn't, sometimes when you read a book about somebody that is not the standard beauty and they make the part of them that is not standard the main focus of the book, so much so that they become less of a person and more of a caricature. But she felt like a person. She was very confident in herself. She had no insecurities about her looks. And I just love that about her, because why should she? Just because she's not a thin white woman doesn't mean that she should be drowning in insecurity. And I absolutely loved that about this book. It was, her body didn't take over in any way. She was extremely sex positive. She was very unapologetic about the fact that she liked sex. She was a dream character because she possessed so many traits that I identify with, on top of being somebody that I aspire to. Dani is the kind of characters you don't know if you want to be her or if you want to be with her. Like, she's that great. She had her flaws, but I think the reason I have such a soft spot for Dani is because her flaws are things I can relate to. Having your perfectionist tendencies, being hard on yourself, wanting to achieve, putting this external pressure on yourself to be the best, to be great. So I related to her on that level, and I absolutely love Zaf because I've come to the conclusion that I love a sweet hero. And Zaf was everything. I think Zaf for me was just a fundamentally good person. Like, it doesn't matter that he had been through some horrendous things, he was just unshakably a good person. And he was patient and he was kind. He had had a crush on Dani since he met her, but he didn't really know if she was stray. He didn't know what her interests were. So he never really told her that he really liked her. And when they agreed to go into their friends with benefits situation, he was like, oh my God. He was like, I'm fucked because I really like her. And he was always one step away from just like falling straight in love with her, which obviously happened because it was kind of inevitable. I loved how their dynamic played out. I loved the fact that it felt like you read the book and you're like, you guys belong together. You guys deserve each other. I love the little like domestic moments between them. Like, I loved that Zaf would always come over and cook for her. He was really so sweet, and he was so in awe of how great she was. That's why I love this book, because Zaf thought Dani was so smart, and he loved that she was so smart, and he loved that she was getting this PhD. And I remember she had this panel discussion with one of her heroes, and he was so excited for her. Like, he was such a cheerleader for her. And I love the fact that they supported each other. Dani loved Zaf's idea of a foundation, and she jumped headfirst into trying to help him as much as she could. And it was the same for him. They really supported each other's ambitions, and they really believed in one another, and they really they liked each other, and they loved each other. And even before they said I love you, because Zaf was the first one who said it, even before they uttered I love you to each other, you could feel it. And I love a book where you can feel the love between the characters even before they said a word. It's always like, it's action based, it's based on how they treat each other, how they listen to each other, how they talk to each other. Also, they've had like a really sexy dynamic as well. It's just beautiful, beautiful. And I love a guy that's just obsessed with his girl, and that was definitely Zaf. I loved Dani's sisters as well. They made appearances in this book. They're kind of like me and my sisters, but we're very close, and we tell each other everything that's happening in our lives. So for me, I loved the addition of her sisters. Obviously, I've read the other books in the Brown Sisters trilogy. Dani just happens to be my favorite book and my favorite sister. Dani was my favorite. I know some people like Chloe more, some people like Eve more, but Dani is my girl because I relate very much to Dani, and I love her so much. And I just wanted her to get all the love that she deserved, because she was so deserving and just so lovely. And Dani and Zaf, top tier couple, and I was rooting for them every step of the way, and I'm so happy they ended up well. Also, Talia Hibbert is another author that I feel is definitely funny in real life. I would love to have a chat with her because the banter between her characters, amazing. And she's one of those people who's like, she has to be funny in real life. There's no way she's that funny on page There's no way she has so many funny characters and it's not funny in real life. There's absolutely no way. So I absolutely just loved the book so much, and I've read it so many times. And yeah, it's just the perfect friends to lovers fake dating book you could ever read, I think. And I know a lot of people were like, oh, Dani was this and Dani was that, but Dani felt real to me. She felt like a real person. She's not this perfect woman. She has a life outside her romance. She has her own dreams. She has her own aspirations. She has her flaws, which she owns. She never was kept secret about her own flaws. And for me, she was perfect not because she was perfect, but because she was real. I just absolutely love this book. And Zaf is a dreamboat. Between Zaf and Charlie, like my expectations have skyrocketed because my goodness, what good men. Perfection. Perfection. Everybody should read this book. I promise you will not regret it. Also, I don't know if it was perfect anxiety rep, but Zaf actually suffers from anxiety. And one of my favorite moments in the book is when Zach has a panic attack. And Dani, despite not having very much experience with handling a panic attack, just is there for him in such a brilliant way. And she's so patient and she's so kind and she's just so, I guess what I'm looking for is decency. Decency is something that I greatly admire in people. And I know it's like decency should be the bare minimum, but then you're in the world and you realize just how many people don't have common decency. And so for me, it was just one of my favorite moments where Zaf's struggles felt real. I'm not in a position to say whether or not it was good anxiety rep, but for me, it felt good. And I love the fact that very early on in the relationship, he was able to get that help and that support from Dani. And Dani was able to be there for him in that moment where he panicked and needed some help. Dani doesn't suffer from anxiety, but there was a moment where she needed him to step in and he did. So I think that mutual reciprocity between them of constantly being there for each other, even when sometimes they don't know what to do, but they do their best anyways, is something that I really loved about this book. All they wanted was the best for each other. All they wanted was for the other person to be happy. And they did whatever it took to make it happen. And I just absolutely loved it. And that was way before they were both in love, I think. And it was just so sweet. It had lovely characters. I loved Zaf's family, Zaf's best friend, Dani's sister. It had great side characters. And for me, a book with great side characters is always amazing. I love the rep of having like Zaf be Muslim and Pakistani, and then Dani be black and bisexual. And I also love the reverse dynamic. Dani comes from a wealthy family. Zaf does not. They're comfortable. They're okay. They make a good living. They're able to, look after themselves. But Dani comes from a really wealthy family. So I love that dynamic because usually you find that it's the guy that is wealthy, either because he was born into it or he made it. But this time it was actually Dani, and I loved it for those reasons. If you haven't read this book, please go and do yourself a favor because it's truly a beautiful book. So the next book on my list is We Should Be So Good by Cat Sebastian. I will just preface this by saying that this book was my introduction to Cat Sebastian. And for my first book by an author to be one of the very best books that I've ever read is truly something, because it made me develop a Cat Sebastian obsession. And I just had to read everything that this woman had ever written, because it was a stroke of brilliance. So it's a historical romance set in the 50s, I believe, between two men in New York City, Nick and Andy. So Nick works for a newspaper called the Chronicle, and Andy is the son of the boss, like the CEO of the company. And so Nick is basically signed as like his buddy or mentor to, show him the ropes, because he will eventually take over the company. And because they're spending so much time together, because Nick is teaching him so much, they become very close. They become best friends, and they start like having lunch together, and Andy would invite Nick to dinner and things like that. From the outset, Nick is actually attracted. So Nick is gay and he's attracted to Andy right from the jump. Andy is bisexual but doesn't know that he's bisexual. So he's in a relationship with this lady called Emily, who also works for the paper, and they're all friends. There's a friendly dynamic. Not that queer people are treated amazingly now, but in the time period it was such a dangerous thing to be a gay man in New York City. And so Nick is overly cautious, understandably so, because he doesn't want people to realize that he's gay. He doesn't want to be prosecuted or killed or profiled for his sexual orientation. And so he's always careful to not slip or not do things that indicate that he likes men. Andy's dating this girl called Emily, and eventually they all start hanging around each other. So it's Nick, Andy, Emily, and Emily's sister, and they all become close. And the funny thing is that Emily actually realized that Nick was gay before Andy. Andy never realized because Andy is very ADHD coded. The term ADHD was never mentioned in the book, obviously, because at the time, like in the 50s, there wouldn't have been a name for it anyways. And so Andy does tend to miss a lot, just like generally forget a lot and be quite careless. And so Emily would sometimes set Nick up with other men that were gay, and it was just they had a great dynamic. And Nick never resented Emily for the fact that she was Andy's partner. He was happy for them, and even though he obviously wished he could be with Andy, it was never going to be a possibility. So he kind of just nursed his wounds quite privately. And obviously Emily then, cheats on Andy, and so Andy is heartbroken and moves in with Nick. And from there, they become closer. As much as this is a romantic story, it's also a story of self discovery. Andy discovers that, oh my God, I am actually falling in love with Nick. Maybe it's because I was coming out of a difficult period in my life, but I was so moved by this book that it was just full of heart and just love, and it was just in the simple things. And then you realize that, my God, this is probably one of the most beautiful love stories that I've ever read. Love the domesticity of them living together because Nick was the one who would cook for them, and then they would go to like the supermarket together. There was a time when Andy got flowers because they were hosting a dinner party for their friends, and Andy got like flowers for Nick, and Nick like lost his mind. He was so taken aback by the gesture because he had been for so long he had been hiding himself, and just to have that person that he could open up with, that he could experience love that he never thought he would have, was just so beautiful. And even though this book made me feel very warm inside, it made me very angry as well. It still makes me angry to this day, where people are just treated horribly for something so beautiful. And I think for me, what this book is that, especially in this day and age, when you hear homophobic people talk about people in the queer community, they make it seem like what they do is unnatural. They almost want to dehumanize them, to make them feel not human in the same way that they are. And you read stories like this, and it's just like, how could anybody object to this kind of love? It is the most pure thing to see two people who are almost solely motivated by wanting to make sure that the other person is happy, by wanting to do little things. All they wanted was to be together, to have this love between them, this gentle, this sweet, beautiful love between them. And it's just like, it's amazing how people can look at that or read that and feel hatred. Honestly, it's quite baffling. It's like I can't really relate to Andy or Nick in very many ways, but it doesn't mean that I cannot see how fundamental this book is and will be to so many people if and when they do discover it. It's just, my goodness. And there were so many little like messages in between that when you read it again and again, like I have, you pick up so many different things. Like in the beginning of the book, um Andy would always constantly leave his keys or forget his keys or lose his keys. And obviously Andy had a problem with being alone because he was an only child and his parents were very career focused, so they didn't spend a lot of quality time with him. But then he moves in with Nick, and all of a sudden, he's not losing his keys anymore. He's not forgetting where his keys are. And it's subtle things like that where you realize he's not doing that because when he goes home, he's not going home to an empty house. He's going home to Nick. And it's that kind of thing where it's like Andy wasn't losing his keys because he was inherently a careless person. He was losing it because he was trying to avoid or prolong going home because he didn't like to be alone, because he struggled with being alone. And it's just little things like that. Or the fact that Nick is such a sweet guy, but he struggles with being vulnerable. And so Andy will oftentimes make him feel seen, like the whole flower buying thing. Nick would never have told Andy to buy him flowers, like he loved flowers. But Andy recognized that, and so he would buy Nick flowers because he knows that flowers would make Nick's day. And I think it's just little things like that where you read a book and you're just like, this is why people love love. It's a book that sort of affirms people's love of love. And I fear that I might never, ever be able to properly explain what this book means to me, but it means so much. And it was my introduction to queer romance. I can't believe that it took me so long, but it was because of this specific book that I've gone on to read so many others. And yeah, I feel like I'm becoming quite emotional because it's my I probably will keep on repeating the word it's beautiful, but it's such a beautiful book. On the one hand, it made me extremely happy and it made me extremely warm on the inside, but at the same time it made me angry that this is how people have to live when all they want to do is love people, and it's not even their fault, nor is it their choice that these are the people that they love, but they have to hide in order not to be killed or not to be prosecuted. And it just makes you so angry for injustice in the world and for like homophobic, ignorant, bigoted people and views. And it's amazing to me that this book was set in the 50s and we're in 2025 and queer people are still fighting and still being treated the way that they're being treated. And it's like we've made a lot of progress, but there's just still we have so much more work to do. But I'm glad that literature like this exists, because if you've ever like even been considering queer romance, or you're the kind of person who likes to read books that you feel represent you, I definitely think give it a try. Not to be dramatic, but this was We Could Be So Good. I don't know if I should say it changed the course of my life, but it definitely opened up so much for me, and it reiterated the things that I value and the things that I love and the things that I support and the ways in which you can be an ally to people who are not like you. I'm in awe of people like Kat Sebastian who can write books and evoke that kind of visceral emotion from somebody just with words. It makes you in awe of people's talents and what they can do. I can't believe that there's a chance that I could have gone my entire life and not read this book. And that would have been pretty tragic, I think. So, yeah, if you've read this book, did it make you feel a similar way? Like, I remember the scene where they profess their love for each other and Nick absolutely freaks out and he starts ironing. It's just so funny and so sweet. The side characters are amazing. I find that with Cat Sebastian, her characters have this found family that they can all be themselves around, because they are quite isolated in the sense that they're not accepted by society. They can't show that they're in love with this person. So they always have this little bubble of support that love them unconditionally for who they are and don't judge them and support them. And found family is a trope that I just adore. And this is not only one of my favorite romance books of all time, it is one of my favorite books of all time. And I think that Cat Sebastian is not nearly as big as she should be. She writes so well. And this is one of those books I will never forget. And it just the privilege of being able to read it is something that I will never take for granted. It's just so beautiful. And I'm ashamed to say how many times I have read it though. It's been a lot. I discovered the book less than a year ago, but I've read it so many times. It's my comfort book for sure. And beautiful, beautiful romance. Another book by Cat Sebastian that I just loved is The Queer Principles of Kit Webb. And it's also a historical romance set in England. And it's between Kit and Percy. Percy's an aristocrat and he comes from obviously a wealthy background. And Kit is a former highwayman. Basically, he used to have a life of crime and he's obviously stopped because he sustained an injury and now lives like a far different life than he used to. And so Percy actually finds out about him because he's trying to hire somebody to steal something from his father. So he discovers Kit and kind of like enlists his services to help with the robbery. Kit has a bad leg, and so he can't do robbery in the way that he used to. So he agrees to teach Percy how to fight and how to stage a robbery. And he's obviously there like every step of the way, but won't be able to be as active as he could have been if he had two good legs. And so they start spending time with each other. And Percy, I loved, because Percy was arrogant in a way that I like. There's a thin line between being arrogant in a good way and being just off putting. Percy was such a ridiculous person in the best way. He was very cocky, he was very arrogant, but he was a good person. He was a bit of an asshole, but in a way that is extremely likable because he was very funny. But he had certain morals that were unshakable. Like there was a time when Kit suggested that Percy should spar with Betty, who is Kit's friend. And he was like, I would never hit a woman. And he was drunk when he said that. And the thing about Betty, she could fight Kit, but there was just something about hitting a woman that he just refused to budge on. And it was just moments like that where his personality and his morals shone through. He, with Kit, he was so unabashedly into Kit. Like, he refused to hide it. He was very flamboyant in nature. Like, he wore like all these bright clothes and wigs, and he was very unapologetic about his love of fashion. Again, that love of fashion thing that I mentioned with Charlie is coming back again. I love a man that loves clothes, and I love a man that loves fashion and acknowledges it. And Percy is definitely one of those people. He loves to dress well. He has an outfit for every occasion. He's like, I would never be caught dead wearing that. Stuff like that, which I really loved about him. For me, I think he was a bit of a star of this book. Also, another part of him that I really loved is his love for his little sister, who was a little baby. So his dad actually married his best friend growing up. His dad is a terrible person, and it was, a historical romance. So you know how those things are, where it's not exactly frowned upon for like an older man to marry like a young person. So his dad married Marianne, who is his best friend essentially. And so he and Marianne are very close because obviously they grew up being best friends, and she then became his stepmother, and then she had a child for his father. So his relationship with Marianne was really cute. Marianne had a daughter called Eliza, who is obviously Percy's half sister, and he loved Eliza so much, and he's always carrying her and being really attentive to her. Kit I loved. Kit had a very tragic background of his own. His family wasn't well off at all. And one of the more challenging aspects of Kit and Percy's relationship was the fact that Percy's father, because of who he is, like a landowner and an aristocrat, had actually been quite cruel to his tenants and the people that had rented on his land. And Kit's family had been deeply affected by the selfishness of Percy's father. So I think sometimes Kit struggled to reconcile with the fact that he was in love with the son of a man that had caused him so much pain. And that was a very big part of the book, is loving somebody knowing that they looked exactly like somebody who had been so cruel to you and had caused you so much pain. I also love the fact that Percy loved Kit so much. He was willing to give up anything for Kit, and he was willing to right his father's wrongs. I won't spoil the book, but in a way that is kind of unheard of, I think, for historical romance. It's like he did something that not a lot of people in his situation would do. And that was mostly to prove his love to Kit and to prove his dedication to their relationship. And I thought it was really sweet. I loved their dynamic. I loved the fact that they would make fun of each other. Percy will have you chuckling to yourself and probably laughing out loud. His ideas. He's just such a ridiculous man, but like in a very endearing way. I loved them building up that trust to each other. Amazing side characters. Like I mentioned, Betty. Kit was such a good man. He had a bad leg, but he would always walk Betty home because he knows how dangerous the world is for a woman. And I loved that awareness that he had about women in his life. He would walk Betty home every evening. It was quite an inconvenience because he had a bad leg and it hurt to the point where he'd actually have to stop halfway through getting home just to rest the leg. So he was also just really kind, really sweet. There was the external plot device of the heist that they were planning together. I think the heist part of it, if you're really looking for the heist to be the main part of the book, I think you might be a little disappointed. Romance is definitely the anchor of the book, and it's definitely what carries the story along, and the heist is kind of like in the background, but it helps push the story along in the sense that I don't think Percy and Kit would ever have met if Percy was not seeking Kit's help in this particular thing. Also, if you've read this book, you know about the spider. There's a whole plot with a spider that's in Kit's cafe, and it's really sweet. It's one of those things that really encompasses why I love them both together and why they're so sweet and why they've become like some of my favorite characters that I've ever read about. I've gone back to read it a lot of times, and it's just two men loving each other despite the fact that they really have no business being together. They just can't avoid it, and I thought it was really sweet, and it's one of my favorites for sure. Up next, we have Excuse Me While I Ugly Cry by Joya Goffney, and it's a YA book about this girl called Quinn whose diary gets stolen from her. And so she begins to get blackmailed by the person who stole it to basically tick things off her to-do list. Otherwise, they'll reveal it to the entire school. And she teams up with this guy called Carter in a race to get it back because he was the last one that had seen it. And one of my favorite things about this book is that Quinn felt very real. Quinn is the kind of character you could relate to in your teen years, where she's very flawed and the things that she does are very embarrassing, but they're not uncommon. The thoughts that she has are all thoughts that we could have had at the same age. And when I was reading reviews of the book, I did see people like express frustration with the way that she handles certain things. But I think that if you're reading the book as an adult, it's very different because you've had a chance to grow. And so reading the book as an adult, you kind of see all her flaws, and it's easy to focus on them and to blame her for certain actions. But at the age that she was, which is 17, 18, I believe, her feelings and her immaturity is entirely normal. It's entirely valid, the feelings that she had and the things that she did. And I related to her on so many levels because at that age, it's a very, very vulnerable time in any girl's life. It's like you're figuring out yourself, you are having all these heightened emotions and all these heightened feelings. And I feel like that particular age of a girl's life, you're navigating so much, and all these decisions that you have to make, like where you're going to for university, like what you'll do for the next stage of your life. And she was very much in a place where she didn't know who she was, and she was trying to figure out what she'd like to do with herself. And she's kind of people pleasing in nature. She wants to make her parents proud. And Carter starts off not liking her because he thinks she's very uppity and stuck up, and she comes from a wealthy family. Her parents are quite successful, and they go to like a private school, so he finds people there quite snobby. What I loved about this book is that there was the discussion about being a black person in a majority white space, and the code switching that you have to do, and almost having to hide certain parts of yourself in order to fit in. And Quinn was definitely dealing with elements of that. There was a very real discussion about black people in white spaces, and sometimes how self-hatred can manifest in different ways, especially with regard to Quinn's parents and the judgments that they make of Carter the first time they see him in their house. And I thought it was really, really good in terms of if you've ever felt bothered or racially profiled. It's a really good book to read, just for that exploration, especially race in terms of how it manifests in a country like America, because I'm Nigerian. So when you grow up in Nigeria like I did, you don't have the same understanding of racial dynamics that you have in the West. And so it offers you an explanation, understanding of what it's like to be in those spaces. And I think it was definitely interesting to tie that in. I loved Carter. He was so sweet and understanding, and he had his own challenges. And I love the fact that he didn't make excuses for even the wrong things that he did. He apologized. He was so responsible. He was just such an exemplary guy, even though he's quite young, and he's a character that you can look up to and aspire to. And I loved the relationship with his little sister. I loved the way he and Quinn's relationship developed. I love the fact that they got to know each other, and their relationship taught them a lot about understanding people and forgiving people, especially when they're making efforts to change, and falling in love for the first time, especially as a teenager where you don't really know what love is, and it's your first experience of love and what that means. And it felt like a YA book, because I feel like sometimes YA books can feel like adult books. This one didn't. It was a YA book that felt like it was dealing with young people who are still figuring themselves out, and it very much felt like a coming of age book. And their chemistry was absolutely beautiful. I loved reading, especially their letters back to each other. Letter writing was a big part of this book, and I loved that. I love letter writing in books generally. I loved the little gang of friends when they banded together to help Quinn and their relationship formed. I love the side characters as well. It was just a very complex book, but I love that because I feel like sometimes with teenagers, people either feel like they don't have enough depth or they undermine just how much teens go through, especially in this day and age. And I love the fact that it really centered them and their feelings and their emotions and their struggles, and different kinds of people from different walks of life and what their challenges might be. And the fact that despite your circumstances, everybody has their challenges, everybody has things that they're struggling with. And we as humans probably do best when we're looking out for each other, when we're connecting based on what brings us together as opposed to what sets us apart. And even though like now that I'm in my 20s, I can't so much relate to what they were going through at this particular point in my life. Is something that if I did think back to when I was that age, I could probably find pieces of myself in both Quinn and Carter. I just think it's a brilliant book, and it's just so sad that it's not more popular than it is. It's a book that I keep on recommending to people if they ask me for good YA books, because it's YA done well. It's YA that feels like YA. It's YA that feels real and raw and realistic, and I just absolutely adored it, and I think everybody should read it. I think it was done age appropriately as well. And I think if you are the kind of person who you find your tastes align with mine, I think you'd really like it, and I hope that more people pick it up. I really do. Next book is another YA book, and it's called The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. And I know that everybody and their mother has heard about this book, especially if you were a kid growing up in the time period that I was. There's no way you haven't either like read the book, heard about the book, watched the movie. Probably, I think when I was about 15, and it stuck with me. I don't remember a lot of the books that I read at that age, but The Fault in Our Stars is a story that stuck with me because I think it's just so beautiful. It's about the Gus and Hazel, and they meet each other when Hazel is encouraged to go to support group. She's been in the midst of dealing with cancer, and she's become quite isolated and without friends, and her parents are worried about not interacting with people and missing out a chunk of her life in terms of interacting with people and just being a teenager in the face of dealing with something as serious as cancer. And so she meets Gus at support group and they hit it off and they go on this adventure falling in love for the first time for both of them. And this book, when I think about this book deeply enough, I start getting emotional because if you know anything about that ending, you know that it was probably one of the saddest endings. But it was just so real because it's like, even though I didn't want the book to end the way it did, I understand that a lot of the time for people in that circumstance, that is the way it ends. And it's so sad because cancer is really a bastard. You go into this book knowing that the person in which the book's perspective is in is not going to live a long life. So you're happy that she's getting to experience this epic love story that even for their age, it's a love story that even a lot of people will just never get to experience. And I loved how real it was. And also, the adaptation of this book to a movie is probably one of the best I've ever seen. And I read the book before I watched the movie. So I know that I loved both equally. I usually don't like the movies of adapted books. Um, so even like I still go back to some of the quotes from the book just because they're so beautiful and like their trip to Amsterdam. I don't know how to explain The Fault in Our Stars, but other than the fact that everybody needs to read this book because it's a book I think that really put life into perspective for me. How precious love is, how much there are people in this life that are just robbed of certain experiences because of certain circumstances, and it really made me wish that I had some superpower that could just minimize people's pain and people's suffering and make sure that everybody had a good life or had at least one aspect of their life that was epic and memorable and unforgettable. And I haven't read it in recent years, but I do remember reading it for the first time and just being struck by the depth of teenagers. And I do know that people tend to write off the feelings of teenagers, or I either make them feel very frivolous or like combative and just like unwilling to reason or incapable of feeling love that way or lacking depth. And I think that was the book because I don't feel like I've ever lacked depth before. And I think that was the first time I had read a book about teenagers that felt like the author had respect for teenagers and what they've been through and who they are as people and isn't trying to minimize anything that they're going through. And I just it definitely made its mark on me and I will never forget. It was one of those fundamental books that made me love reading, and for that I think it will always be one of my favorites. I understand how I captured people the way it did. It's just such a beautiful book. I absolutely just love it, and I think I always will, just because at that point of my life it really was everything. Next on my list, we have You Should Be So Lucky by Cat Sebastian. This is why I know that the universe just wanted me to read Cat Sebastian books because I bought these books on a whim. So I was scrolling through Goodreads and I saw that somebody that I was following really liked these two books. And so even without me checking what they were about, I bought them. If you know me, that is very uncharacteristically like me. I usually will read reviews, read what the book is about. And it's another historical romance. It's between these two guys called Eddie and Mark. We actually know Mark from the previous book because Mark works at the Chronicle like Andy and Nick. He actually reviews queer books for the Chronicle. And so he's always he suspected that Nick was queer. He would always recommend books to Nick because Nick also was an avid reader, and so he would recommend these books and Nick would always be annoyed, like, why are you giving me these books? I'm trying to hide my sexuality from you guys. And Eddie was a baseball player, I believe, who had moved to New York and was really struggling to find friends. Eddie, I think, is somebody who's quite extroverted. In order for Eddie to thrive, he needs to feel human connection. And he was the kind of person where he didn't really think a lot about what he said. His intentions were often good, but he kind of put people off. And so he was really struggling. He was very close to his mom, but his mom lived all the way in Nebraska. He was in New York. And so he just really needed a friend. And that's when he found Mark. And Mark was quite slow to want to befriend Eddie. But the best way I can describe Eddie is that he's just this puppy that you cannot say no to. And he eventually just claws his way into his heart, and then you wonder how he got there and why you can't let him go. And they start hanging out because Mark starts to write a profile about Eddie and his team, and so he's spending a lot of time with Eddie. I love the love in this book, but one of my favorite things is the exploration of grief. Mark in this book had lost his partner that he had been with for a few years, and obviously because of the time period, this was 1960s in New York, and so they were not able to have a public relationship because it was illegal to be gay at that time. And so he's struggling with the fact that he had had this entire relationship with this man. They were as good as married, and they had built a home and they had built a life together, and this man passes away, and he can't even grieve him in the way that people grieve their partners and the loves of their lives, because there's this degree of danger and shame. And it's hard enough when somebody you love dies, but the additional layer of grief is not being able to be recognized for what you were in the same way like a wife would. Because if you're a wife and you lose your husband, there's a certain way that you're treated. Or if you're a husband who loses his wife, there's a certain almost like respect that you're given for being that person's partner. And Mark was very much his partner, but he couldn't grieve in the way that a wife would or a husband would, because their relationship was not acceptable by society standards at the time. When he meets Eddie, he's basically drowning in grief, and he has not really worked through any of it. But he's also in a place where he's financially secure because his partner had left him his apartment and a lot of money. And so he had that almost as like evidence of what this man had meant to him. But he's still reeling with the fact that he spent a good amount of time with him, and he can't tell anybody that he's grieving. He can't tell anybody why he's grieving, because it's basically him expressing his grief is a danger to himself. And it just really puts into perspective how lucky you are if you were born as a heterosexual person, in terms of how you're able to move through society, and the fact that you don't have to hide certain parts of yourself in fear of being arrested or being persecuted or being killed. I think sometimes it makes stories like these more precious, more almost like you want to wrap them in bubble wrap and not let anything bad happen to them. They're so precious. And I think the dynamic between Eddie and Mark was just so kind and so gentle and so understanding. They became essential to each other's existence in a way that felt organic. They had so much patience for each other. Eddie was so sweet. If you've noticed my thread of favorite books, you know that I love a sweet man. And Eddie's kind of like the sunshine character, where Mark is a little bit prickly. This book is very emotional. If you're somebody who's extremely empathetic, I think it will hit you in the feels, and it will make you kind of angry for what queer people had to go through at that time, especially, in the world that we live in. And for me, they make them all the more precious, and it makes you question why people are so hateful of these people that are doing nothing to harm them, and it makes you want to be even more of an ally and more of just wanting to contribute in any way that you can to a more accepting world, a world where we can acknowledge each other's differences and still treat each other like equals. It was just the purest thing. One thing I love in a romance book is phone calls and emails and letters. I find myself liking when those tropes are included, and they had lots of phone calls where Eddie would go to the phone booth, because also this was the 60s, so they didn't have like mobile phones, so he'd go to the phone booth and he'd just talk to Mark. It's a comfort book for me. It's just so I love a sweet, healthy dynamic. Will I ever be able to describe books like this without like stumbling over my words? I feel like that's how I know that I really love a book, is if I'm stumbling to explain it, because you want people to feel how much you love them, but you're so tongue-tied by just how much they impacted you that sometimes it's difficult to talk about. Sometimes I think there's just some books that are supposed to have a profound impact on you, and this is just one of them. Just the most beautiful relationship. And Mark and Eddie, they deserve the world. And I love the found family. They had like quite a lovely circle with these other women who are also in a relationship, and then Lula, who is Mark's dog. She also played a role in the book, and Eddie just absolutely loved her. Because a big part of this book is grief, as I mentioned, and the fact that Lula was still struggling with the grief of Mark's partner, who was called William, by the way, his passing, and the fact that she, as a dog, was also struggling with grief as well. I love a book that pulls on my heartstrings, and Sebastian is very good at that. Whenever I think of it, I think of the massive privilege it is to discover books like this and to exist in a world where I can read stories such as this, and it just makes me feel extremely happy and extremely lucky. The next book on my list is The Charm Offensive by Alison Cochrun. It was about Dev and Charlie. Charlie was this guy who had been dealing with, he has OCD and he has anxiety, and so he had been basically he had a panic attack which had made him lose the company that he had built with his best friend, and so he's on a mission to improve his public image so that he can get back to running the company. And so he decides to go on this dating reality show in hopes that it can. He comes from a family who never understood him and never was there for him. Essentially, in this world, he's alone and he just wants to be normal and he just wants people to see him that way. So he goes on this reality dating show in hopes that he can basically portray himself in a normal way and people can see it and eventually invite him back to run his company again. And he meets Dev, who is a producer on the show. And Charlie has a lot of social anxiety, and Dev immediately takes him under his wing and feels very protective of him. And Charlie has never really experienced, sexual attraction before. He has, like, in vague sort of ways, and he finds that he's connecting a lot more with Dev than he is with the girls on the show. Dev really believes in the show. He believes in what this show is trying to achieve, almost in like a very blind way where he doesn't see the flaws of the show. And so he wants it to work because he loves love and he loves the idea that this show could inspire people to fall in love. And Charlie is just like, I like the women on the show, but I don't feel the way that I'm supposed to feel for them. He feels all the things he's supposed to feel for the women, he now feels with Dev. I know I keep saying these books changed the course of my life, but they wouldn't be all-time favorites if they didn't, I think. And this book is just about love and acceptance, and I think what love is supposed to be. It's like you see this person and you see their flaws and you see them for who they are. You don't see them for who you think they should be. You meet them where they are and you accept them and you love them and you're there for them. And it's fun and it's sexy and it's exciting, but it's also protective. And they were meant to be. I loved seeing Charlie like come out of his shell little by little because he was being accepted finally by somebody. And somebody was able to see him as a person who was deserving of basic decency and love. And then Dev was also able to be in a relationship where his partner is actually putting him first and studying him and his likes and his dislikes. And it was a beautiful book. And I loved Charlie's best friend. I loved Parisa. She was such a hoot. And I loved the dynamic of like this side characters. How do you describe a book that you love so much? It was as close to perfection as I think a book will ever get. And I was just like, guys, how could you read a book like this and feel disgust or hatred? Someone should explain to me how you can read something like this and go, ugh, hate them. What? This is the stuff of dreams. What do you mean? Like, it's just, books like this really restores your faith in humanity, especially when you feel like you don't have that much. I just love kindness in a book. Kindness is just one of those things. It's so undervalued, so underappreciated, but there's just nothing quite like kindness. And when you combine that with love, it's just perfection. And so Charm Offensive is one of my favorite books, and I think always will be. It just has a very special place in my heart. Also, if you like The Bachelor, you might like that element. The element of that book was not that interesting to me. I was more so interested in every moment where Charlie and Dev were alone and the development between them. But it was a nice sort of like subplot, although that was not really why I was there. But if you like The Bachelor, definitely pick up this book because it has, dynamics of something you already like. So next up we have Daniel Cabot Puts Down Roots, another book by Sebastian, and this is actually part of the Cabot family series. So it's about Daniel and Alex. Daniel comes from a very political, wealthy family. If you think of the Kennedys, Cabots are like the fictional Kennedys. They're very politically prolific. They're quite wealthy. He has this sort of almost dynastic feel to his family and his heritage. And Alex immigrated to America from Ukraine. He's become a doctor and he runs a clinic for other immigrants like himself with his best friend, who is also an immigrant. I believe she was Chinese. And it's the ultimate best friends to lovers. We did not know. We've been in love this whole time. We've been in a relationship this whole time and we did not realize it. I think the only people who were surprised at how in love they were the two of them. Everybody in their close circle kind of were like, Daniel and Alex are in love. And just something about Cat Sebastian, man. She has me in a chokehold, guys. You know what? Save me from Cat Sebastian, because if there's any author I need to be saved from, it's her. This whole list could have been her. I'm not even joking, because she writes such beautiful stories. Alex, in particular, is written as somebody who might be on the spectrum. I'm no expert. And Daniel is very like free spirited, almost like there's a very whimsy nature. He doesn't over plan, he doesn't overthink. He's just more like go with the flow. And Alex is very much the opposite. And they kind of hold space for each other. I love the fact that their relationship was predicated on understanding and the truth. They were brutally honest with each other in a way that I don't see in a lot of romance books. It's because their relationship was formed on that basis, especially because Alex is written like a character that's on the spectrum. Needs a lot of directness. He's not somebody that will ever understand a hint. You know what I mean? And so I love the fact that their relationship felt like two people who fundamentally understood each other to the point where they're able to meet each other's needs, and they don't have big, massive problems. Again, because they're so brutally honest with each other in a way that I find a lot of couples are kind of hesitant to be. Like things like when they tell each other, oh, I need space, or I don't want to do certain things, or can you go home, when Alex is feeling overwhelmed. And I love that because I don't know how to explain it. It was a different dynamic than what I read typically. And I loved every part of it. I loved that there was this underlying message of sometimes people on the spectrum, they can be made to feel undeserving of the love that people who are not on the spectrum deserve. And it's not true. They're human beings just like the rest of us, and they deserve to feel loved for who they are. And I love that Daniel was so in tune with Alex as well. They were so in tune with each other's needs, and their strengths and weaknesses complemented each other. They were different in a way that made sense, and I just couldn't get enough. This book is like all vibes, not very much plot, which I loved at the time because I was like, I'm just here for Alex and Daniel. It's very heavy on the steaminess. I just love that dynamic of having that history where everybody knows you're together. Everybody's just waiting for you to take the plunge and be in a relationship, because it's like you guys are together but you don't realize it. And I just loved it. Daniel's mother she's who I want to be when I grow up. Daniel's mother is a hoot. And I've actually read Daniel's father's book, which is a bit of a novella, and it's called Tommy Cabot something. So I loved her in that book, and I loved her even more in her son's book. She loved Alex as well. They would have like shopping days with each other, and they had a very close relationship outside of him being Daniel's best friend. And I just love that underlying message of meeting people where they are. Cat Sebastian is great at writing people who just fundamentally want to make their person happy and will do anything. There's this sense of equity between her couples. In fact, in most of the queer romances that I read, I find that there's just more equity between the couples. It almost feels like they do everything in their power to make sure that both people in the relationship are seen, are heard, are understood, are valued. And there's not that much that happens in terms of sacrificing parts of themselves in order to fit into this relationship, which I find with a lot of straight romances there's this, especially with a relationship between a man and a woman, there's this underlying sense of especially the woman having to compromise a lot that I find that queer romance books don't have. And I think that's probably why I found myself gravitating more towards them. It's just like people who are willing to do whatever it takes to be together and to have a relationship be mutually beneficial and to love each other and to wade through the challenges that come from being in a relationship that is frowned upon, that is rejected by lots of people, even in this day and age. They're just so beautiful. I just loved everything that had to do with their dynamic, everything that their relationship stood for. And also their relationship with their families were really sweet as well. They had really supportive families and friends, and it was just so sweet, really. I love a sweet book. I love a sweet book with sweet characters, and they hit all the spots for me, and definitely an all-time fave for sure. And last but certainly not least is The Long Game by Rachel Reid. It is the continuation of Shane and Ilya's love story from their original book, which was called Heated Rivalry. And so this is them after they've got together and are navigating the challenges of having a relationship that is secret for reasons that are mentioned in the first book. We have a rivalry, and they're both navigating being queer men in the hockey world. There are not a lot of athletes that are out. And so they're navigating having a long distance relationship as well as a secret relationship, especially in the modern era where there's social media and people can take pictures of you and put them on the internet and leak your relationship. And I loved Heated Rivalry, but The Long Game took it to, if Heated Rivalry was a 5-star, The Long Game for me was in the stratosphere. It was just, at times, this book was heart-wrenching. Just them struggling to deal with completely human things, missing your partner, wishing you could sleep in the same bed for more than one night with your partner, missing the fact that you can't physically touch your partner in public even when you want to, depression, Ilya dealing with his dad has just recently died and he hasn't dealt with it, or dealing with jealousy, that the fact that your partner might find somebody who they don't find it so difficult to be in a relationship with. And it's just it was such a beautiful book. I think I like Shane in the first book more, but Ilya cemented himself as one of my favorite main male characters that I've ever read about. He's just such an incredible person, and if you go on to read the series, you know just how much Ilya means to a lot of people. He puts on this air of being funny and a bit like cheeky, but he's so kind and has such a good heart. And my heart broke for him so much. And Ilya almost experiences something life altering, and it doesn't happen, but it was a scare. And I cannot explain to you, the phone call that happened when it was happening and after will be forever imprinted in my mind, the way that they both navigated that particular challenge of their relationship. This is a god tier book for me. Their struggles felt entirely real. They felt even more human, because I feel like sometimes in these books where you have these like wildly successful men with like big careers and they're famous, they can almost be painted in a way that is not human. There's almost like maybe an unconscious dehumanization of them and their struggles. And this book really made them both entirely human. Their flaws are at the forefront. Everything that you would consider to be perfect about them almost took a backseat to just how human, the fragility of the human heart and feelings, and how love strengthens you but also makes you quite vulnerable. And so I think that was what I really, really connected with in terms of really loving the story. What else can I say? Oh, I love the addition of Ilya loving dogs and Ilya with kids, them both with kids, because there was a particular scene where they babysat Hayden's kids, and it was so sweet. Like I don't want to spoil anything, but they had like the cutest scene. But there were still moments from the old book, like how Ilya and Shane have probably the most hilarious dynamic. They're constantly poking with each other. There's still elements of when they were just rivals to each other. I also loved their relationship with Shane's parents, especially Shane's mum. She showed up a lot in the book as well. It's a book that I will never forget for just like the visceral reactions I have, and the fact that you can have these completely fictional characters that make you feel so much and feel just so human because of how much care was put into writing them. I like to read specific parts. I'm just hoping that somebody does special editions, because I just feel like I need to own special editions of this book. If I don't own a special edition of this book, I won't be a happy person. You can technically read it as a standalone, but you need that added context of what their relationship was in Heated Rivalry and how they've evolved, because it really does paint like a full picture. And I think it makes The Long Game that much more special when you see how they started and where they've ended up. But it's just so, so beautiful. And I think everybody who's a romance reader, like, why are you not reading it? There's no reason why you shouldn't be reading it, really. Like, if you've not discovered Ilya and Shane, I'm sorry for you. Like, I'm genuinely sorry. And my only regret is not knowing what it will ever feel like to read this book for the first time again. I do have a few honorary mentions. I thought I should mention Better Life Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert, which is the first book in the Brown Sisters trilogy, Dani's sister. And Reid, I loved that. It's definitely one of my favorites. The Perfect Crimes of Marion Hayes, another Cat Sebastian book. The Soldier Scoundrel, another Cat Sebastian book. On the Edge by J.J. Mulder. A Gentleman Never Keeps Score, also by Sebastian. You know what I think? I think I should make a video about the books that didn't quite make this list but are pretty close. So I think if this video does very well, I probably will look into doing that video, because I think the books on those videos are very close to perfection and books that I think everybody should read. But in the spirit of top tens, they didn't quite make it. So if you're interested in a book that didn't quite make my top 10 but would be in my favorites of all time, please do let me know. Also, let me know what your favorite romance books of all time are. I kind of love when people analyze me. So I'm definitely inviting you to do that. If you look at my list of books that are my favorites, what does that tell you about the kind of reader I am, of the kind of person I am? I'm definitely interested. I kind of love when people give me analysis, because I feel like when you're studying yourself and you're talking about yourself, you can be quite biased or like have a very warped view of yourself. And so I think it'll be interesting to see sort of the conclusions that people come to about me based on my reading. It'll be interesting to see. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you can like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you another time. Bye.